Welcome back at the Lodge with Jim and Michelle, a podcast celebrating life spent in the great outdoors. Whether you're an angler, a hunter, trapper, or someone just enjoying an active outdoors lifestyle, this show is for you. Join Jim Broughton and Michelle Sherman as they discuss outdoor news, opinions, events, and much more occurring over recent weeks. It's time now to pull up a chair, pour a favorite beverage, gather close to the campfire, and kick up those tired feet and relax, because you're back at the Lodge.
All right, well, welcome to Back at the Lodge with Jim and Michelle and guest.
That's right. We have our first official big-name guest today.
Big name, big personality, Scott.
Not to belittle the people that we have hit on before, because they've been important too, but today we have a guest that I think many of our listeners are going to recognize. And I'm going to let Michelle introduce him because she goes way back with Scott.
We have Scott Laseth here with us today, also known as the Sporting Chef. So welcome, Scott.
Good to be here, and I think you may need to work on your definition of important guest and special guest or whatever it is.
For Jim and I, this is a big deal. Thanks for making our day.
Hey, you bet. That was easy.
Yeah. So Scott and I have known each other since
the early days of Sportsman Channel, anyway, 12-ish or so years ago.
Yeah, and one of the things that I worked with Scott on was actually this little program that Sportsman Channel created called HuntFishFeed. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, would you be able to help us out on this event and be our executive chef? And you said no.
I said, sure. I think was that Orlando? Is that where that was? Or somewhere, San Antonio?
Or D.C., maybe? I can't remember.
It's all kind of a blur.
And what year was this?
2007.
Okay.
That was our very first one.
About 50 HuntFishFeeds ago.
Yeah. We've fed about 20,000 people since then.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, maybe we should tell the listeners where we're at today in case they hear some background
Yes, some background noise. Well, today we're actually at a HuntFishFeed event at the Dorothy Day Center, which is part of the Catholic Charities Group in downtown St. Paul, Minnesota.
And this is, I believe, the second time we've been here? Or
yes,
has it been...
we were here in 2010, and we fed fish at that time,
right.
Which is an interesting story in of itself, because we were at an ice fishing tournament. Scott, were you there?
I was not.
What?
I must have been otherwise occupied.
You must have been. And I had to get special permission from the DNR to carry that much poundage of fish in my little Buick LaCrosse.
I bet.
To the center. So that was interesting. I always remember that.
Well, what are we feeding today here in a
Chef
few minutes?
Scott.
Today is it's one of our go-to menus. We've got venison chili. We have honey cheddar cornbread, fresh fruit, homemade brownies, a green salad. We also have milk. What we're looking for is a sustainable, high-protein, very healthy diet, and venison certainly qualifies in the high-protein, sustainable part.
Well, it sounds not only healthy, but also very delicious.
Yeah. It's good, yeah. It's so far, everyone seems to be pleased.
Yeah. Well, Scott, let's we set the background for where we're at here today, but let's talk about just outdoor cooking in general a little bit here. One of the things that I guess I'm dying to ask you is, let's just assume that you are asked for your last meal.
Oh.
And it can be anything wild game related. I want to know what that meal would be, and specifically, how would it be prepared?
It would be a cut of meat that doesn't require a whole lot of fuss. For me, it would probably be an elk backstrap, elk tenderloin, a little too tender for me. I like it a little bit toothy. It would be a well-trimmed, about a 3-inch thick elk backstrap with, I've dry aged it for 14 days if I have that much time on my last meal. I'm going to need a little notice on when my last meal's coming.
I didn't say you would have to cook your last meal.
Okay,
I thought
good.
Maybe it would be cooked for you.
Excellent. I'd like to have it dry aged, so it's going to be nice and tender by itself without having to mess with it. I'm not going to cook it past rare to medium rare, maybe tops 130 degrees. Salt and pepper, a couple of homegrown tomatoes, maybe a little rosemary, no fuss. I'm going to let that elk backstrap speak for itself.
All right, great.
Wait, I'm going to top it with a couple of raw oysters.
Are you serious?
Yes. Raw oysters being one of my favorite foods. My favorite foods aren't cooked. homegrown tomatoes, raw oysters.
Well, I saw you
So-
on your Sporting Chef show, which airs on Sportsman Channel Sundays at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. You actually popped a raw scallop in your mouth.
Yes.
During that show, and you're like, that's going to freak some of you people out. But yeah, you really do like to eat raw food.
People eat raw scallops. I mean, and that's...
No, people around here don't. Well, number one, we don't
They do
get
eat
it.
lutefisk, though, so they're...
Okay,
close.
right? If you can do
Yeah.
that, the door's wide open.
That's
You
right.
can
Right.
eat fish that's been in lye. So, but what's like that did freak me out. I'm like, whoa. And I
right.
know you like your meat really rare too, and
Sure.
that freaks me out too. So,
Well, and people want their food cooked to a safe temperature, right?
Right.
If you take
I
a
don't wanna
scallop
die.
and you cook it to 145, 150 degrees, it's a garbanzo bean. So it's better. And, sashimi, right? Japanese food,
Yeah.
it's just,
Yeah,
when I go
which I
to a
don't eat
Japanese
either.
restaurant, I get
Crunchyroll.
I get the seaweed salad and the sashimi, no roll. That's what I eat. Do you not eat that here?
No.
What?
No. So where did that come from?
People have been eating raw stuff all the time. Oysters, scallops, clams.
You grew up in Virginia.
Yeah, we're at Chesapeake Bay. We were right there. Most of my more adventurous food came from traveling. I left Virginia a long time ago, went to school in the West, and stayed West, where they seem to enjoy a more variety of foods than perhaps at your house. How much
I
cream?
get shit all the time.
How much-
there goes our
cream
reader.
of corn.
How much
yeah.
cream of mushroom soup? How much cream of mushroom soup do you have in your pantry, by the way?
Yeah, about 3.
Yeah.
Just 3 cans.
Well, we have none in my household because I banned it. I don't like mushrooms, so
Well, cream of celery.
yes.
Yeah, there.
We have that.
I
yes.
gotcha.
Well, Scott, speaking of temperature, I guess I have a question here. How important do you feel it is to have a quality meat thermometer in your kitchen or out in the backyard grill or whatever?
A good meat thermometer, and the one I have is maybe $5 that I have in my shirt here, but a good meat thermometer makes all the difference in the world. When people say, well, I cook my deer or my duck to medium rare, and I'll say, well, what color is it? And they'll say, oh, it's just a little pink. I'm going, that's not medium rare. Use your meat thermometer. Medium rare to me on a piece of venison or a piece of duck is still just a little bit purple. And that's where we lose people, because very often it looks like liver. Your mind tells you it tastes like liver, and you've heard about gamey flavors and all that kind of stuff. So good meat thermometer makes a big difference, especially if you're cooking larger hunks of meat. If you've got venison roast, shoulder roast, you got to know what that internal temp is so you know when it's done.
Right. Now, let me say this. Do you use the meat thermometer just so it's not overcooked, or do you also use it to make sure that some of the connective tissue and the fat and that renders out so you have the right, the right amount of cooking?
And that does make sense. I use a meat thermometer just so I can say I have one, but I've done it enough where you can look at it and go, oh yeah, it's done. And you can poke it with your finger and know that's what it's done.
Right,
but
but we're
until you
talking
get to
to-
that point,
right, we're talking to
use your
people
meat
that-
thermometer.
Amateurs.
And so on the tougher cuts, when you want to break down that connective tissue, like on the shoulders and necks and some of the tougher hindquarter roasts, you need to get it to about 175, and then you want to wrap it, and if you can put a little liquid in there too in order to break that down. You let the oven, smoker, grill do the work for you, and that's where that meat thermometer comes in handy. If you brought your roast to 140 degrees, it's not going to break down that tissue.
Right,
So,
right.
point well taken, yeah.
Well, what temp does it need to get to then?
For me, if I'm doing something like a boar shoulder and I want it to be more like pulled pork, I'm going to get to 175, and then I'm going to wrap it, and I'm going to put a little barbecue sauce in there, put it back in a 225-degree smoker or oven for about another 2 hours. I don't know what the exact temperature is, but at that point, everything falls apart. When you take a venison shoulder and you just rub it with olive oil, salt, and pepper, brown it, throw a can of beer in the roasting pan with celery, carrot, onion covered up, lower it to 225. In about 8 hours, you'll be able to pull that shoulder bone out. It'll come out clean. All the meat just falls right off. Connective tissue no longer exists.
Speaking of salt and pepper, I'm going to segue into this. Obviously, everybody has salt and pepper in their pantry. But what is that one other spice that you feel complements salt and pepper that sportsmen need to consider for most of their recipes a lot of people put a lot of different spices and make it real complex flavors, but
Right.
from your cooking, what's that one other spice that really complements salt and pepper?
For me, if I don't have it fresh, I'm going to use garlic powder or granulated garlic. And there's so many different dishes. If I kind of go, I open the pantry and I go, let's see, what do I want this to taste like? And so if I want some high notes in there, I'm going to add citrus-type flavors. But really, salt, pepper, garlic should get you anywhere, provided that you don't overcook it.
And the salt, you don't use regular table salt, right? 9 times out of 10.
I use a kosher salt. And really, I'm a big fan of the High Mountain seasonings. And they're not nearly as salty as some of the other blends.
Oh.
So
if you're watching your high blood pressure.
If you're watching your blood pressure, that's right.
And everybody looks at me for the record. Well, Scott, what's another cooking technique that you think too many sportsmen overlook that they should at least give it a chance?
Sous vide just came to mind, actually. Have you guys talked sous vide on the show before?
No.
We have.
Okay, sous
I'm
vide.
not that advanced.
Sous vide, there's nothing advanced about it. And it's probably the simplest way to turn tough cuts into tender. So it's spelled S-O-U-S-V-I-D-E, sous vide. And it's
French, right?
It's French, and it's basically taking, let's say you take Canada goose breasts, which are not known for their tenderness, and you season it, you put it in a food saver bag, and then it goes into this water bath. And what the sous vide does is it's a precise controlled temperature water bath. So they have big sous vide units that cost hundreds of dollars that you can put on your tabletop, but my wife won't let me put anything else on the counter. Or they have the little portable ones that look just like a little hand mixer. You put it into any container of water and it maintains a precise temperature. So
that's pretty cool.
While you're at work, you've got your sous vide honker breast floating in 125-degree water, and it is so ridiculously tender. When you get home, what it's not going to be is browned on the outside. So you just want to make sure you have a nice hot cast iron skillet or grill. Take it out, sear it. I'm telling you, that otherwise tough honker breast will melt in your mouth.
And what's the retail on that portable one?
About $180. There's a company called Anova that I know of that makes the portable ones.
I bet Williams-Sonoma does too.
They're going to have it, but you're going to pay more. Shop around, go to Amazon or wherever, and find the Anova precision, whatever they call it, water bath sous vide looking thing.
I haven't heard many people use sous vide.
You're gonna.
In our circles.
I'm telling you, it's perfect for game.
Yeah.
You have to be careful with fish. If you leave fish in there too long, it'll turn into fish chowder.
Now that's something that's typically used in restaurants, isn't it?
Sure.
To make it the ease of cooking in that.
Well, and it's not just the ease of cooking; it really will render tougher meats tender, and it will not overcook it. So your internal temperature will always be perfect. It's not going to go above 125 degrees because it's in that 125-degree water bath.
Sure.
I've tried to do the same thing. I tried to make a redneck sous vide with a crock pot, and it didn't quite work the same because the temperature you can't control.
So, is that something you can do with Ziploc bags?
Sure.
When you force all the air out?
And you can also take that Ziploc bag and just take a clothespin and clip it to along the edge of the pot with the water bath in there, and it'll do the same thing.
So the fancy equipment's nice, but you can also scale it back and accomplish largely the same thing.
Get the sous vide, and I've seen some YouTube deals on how to make your own sous vide, and it looked to me like it was way too much work.
Yeah.
So,
what is your take on some of these little portable smokers, these little handheld things that people try and... Is that a gimmick? Nothing takes the place of a regular smoker, but are there... When it comes to using liquid smoke and these little can you really cut corners and achieve success?
I don't think it tastes proper. I'm not a liquid smoke guy. Liquid smoke to me has kind of a real funky edge to it. If you maybe put just a little bit in it, and I was going to say like a hair, but you don't really talk about hair and food in the same sentence, but...
pea drop size.
Right. Just a tiny bit. I don't know. I prefer real smoke. And I like the versatility. I don't mind whether you use pellets, real wood, charcoal, don't care, but I think it should be real smoke.
Okay.
I'm surprised you asked that question, Mr. Barbecue Judge.
Well, I do. I mean, I see its popularity growing because everybody likes shortcuts.
Right.
And they're trying to achieve something that they can achieve, but I thought I would get Scott's take on it because...
Well, can you taste the difference between someone who's done it the shortcut way
Well,
versus...
I think you can. You can certainly see it, too, by looking at it. I mean, there's
You won't
missing
get
the
a smoke ring.
you know?
Right.
And so, I mean, it's not only the taste, but it's the visual, and I think some of the characteristics of smoking you just can't achieve by trying to cut corners.
Right.
So,
Okay.
well, Scott, what's the most exotic thing you've ever eaten?
You know,
And enjoyed. Let's
oh boy, that
qualify
narrows it down. The on the Dead Meat show, we did worst thing had to be python. Best described as gum that had been stuck to the bottom of your desk for 5 years, which sounds delicious, I know. You know, of the toothy creatures, probably beaver. Oddly enough, to me, it's very roast beef-like. We had beaver tail soup. You know, you take a beaver tail and you blister it just like a bell pepper, and you chunk it up and make beaver tail soup out of it.
That's cool.
It was really good. Some of the things that surprised me on the Dead Meat show was nutria, for instance. I mean, it has an image problem because it looks like a big rat.
It looks like a muskrat, kind of.
But you know, they're vegetarians. They eat good stuff. Look, you like bacon, right? And what does a pig eat? Right, the door's wide open.
Right.
People seem to make an exception for bacon because it tastes so good. But really, of the exotic stuff, you know, armadillo, don't eat the armadillo. It's a leprosy thing, I guess. But really, beaver's one of my favorite non-mainstream game animals.
That's why we like serving venison.
Right.
You know, tying it back to why we're here right now at these shelters, because deer are vegetarians. They eat just leaves and grass and all that. So that's what you're taking in, and that's why we always say when I reach out to media for these events, I always say it's organic, sustainable, renewable,
high protein, everything.
high
Sure,
protein food
right.
source that we're using to feed the homeless. Because, and I don't think I said this before, but Scott knows, like when we come to these shelters, like you said, we've been to like 50 shelters in the last few years. They don't get a lot of protein at these places. So that's why we're always trying to encourage the deer donations, through your local butcher. If you're in a state where you can get multiple deer, save them for yourself, but give one to your local butcher to give to the shelter they're working with.
Well, let's get back to the Hunt Fish Feed program here. What are some of the things that you've served in all these 50 different...
Mostly it's venison chili
Is
or
it?
tacos.
Mostly venison. We did do waterfowl stew in Sacramento, California for 650 people, but we had to get special permission from Fish and Game for that because obviously I was over my possession limit at some point with 150, 60 pounds of duck and goose breasts, which, by the way, nobody should have 160 pounds of ducks and goose breasts to deal with. But and then we've done salmon and we've done bison. We've done wild hogs. And so, wild hogs, one of the gigantic sources that we have, especially in the Sun Belt, because, we can't kill them fast enough. We can't eat them fast enough. And so, there's no reason why we shouldn't be feeding those
There's
to
no reason
shelters.
why every Texas shelter should be serving,
Absolutely.
Pulled pork sandwiches for every meal, practically.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So.
Well, we should probably look to start wrapping it up here since I think we've got a crowd to feed. Well, how many are we expecting today, do we know?
250.
Okay.
250, which is actually a kind of a smaller size group for the Hunt Fish Feed program. And it's funny, with venison, you had talked about when you tell people it's venison, a lot of times they have a mental image, and they'll say, "Wow, it tastes a little. I can taste a little gaminess to it." And I've done that very same thing with beef burger, and I said, "This is venison," and it's kind of a mental thing. And people said, "Oh yeah, I can taste that." I'm going, "Nah, it's hamburger." So, for people that have decided a long time ago that venison isn't edible, they should give it another try.
Out of 250, we might have one person.
Right.
That will say, "I'm not eating that." But usually we have a menu. We don't have it right now. Like, maybe we'll put one up that we have a menu that specifically shows our guests today exactly what they're eating.
Right.
It's not like we're trying to hide the fact that we're feeding a venison or anything like that. We're very upfront and very open about it. So.
Well, the last question I have today for you, Scott, is this. A lot of sportsmen watch you on TV preparing food.
Yeah.
When you watch sportsmen preparing, what makes you cringe and you just want to go over there and shake them and change the way they're doing something?
Well, and I'll tell you the one that doesn't, I don't really cringe, but I'm thinking, okay, we've seen this before. You take your duck, deer, whatever, and you cut it into little strips, and you soak it in teriyaki, and then you wrap it in jalapeno bacon.
You put bacon on it.
Jalapeno bacon and wrap the whole thing, right? Wrap cream cheese, wrap the whole thing in bacon. And I know it tastes good. And that's going to be the first thing that people are going to eat.
Jalapeno bacon poppers.
Right. The poppers are really good. Very popular. I know everyone's going to go crazy over them, but there's other things you can do. There are as many things you can do with your game as you can do with any kind of
So
domestic
you're encouraging
meat.
people to be more adventurous and not just get stuck in a rut.
Be more
and doing
adventurous.
the
Yeah,
same
do
thing.
stir fries, roasts, with those venison shanks. Don't feed them to the dog. That's also buco. That's braised. You have to tie a string around it because it gets so tender it falls right off the bone.
All right.
So that's my only deal. I don't, okay. Crock pot, cream of mushroom soup. That's got to stop.
You mean like throwing the meat into the crock pot?
Taking pheasant and cutting them up, or blah blah blah,
And throwing a thing of cream of mushroom soup
or grilling the pheasant breast and then putting it into a casserole and topping it with cream of mushroom soup, cracker crumbs, and cheese. And I call that the beige food segment. And the thing
Sounds
is,
like a Minnesota dinner to me.
it's very we'll put hash browns on top or tater tots on top,
yes.
and it's good. I understand that it's good, but it's going to taste exactly like cream of mushroom soup. I want my pheasant to taste like
Well,
pheasant.
isn't that what you're getting at with the poppers? Like, if you put jalapeno with anything, you're going to get jalapeno. So you're not really even tasting the wild game.
Right. And when people say, it is so good, it doesn't even taste like duck, to me, that's not the victory.
That
duck.
means you're tasting everything else.
They're trying to disguise the flavor of it, cover it up, as opposed to enhancing it,
Right.
treating it right. If your duck tastes livery and gamey, do not blame the duck.
Right. Blame you.
You've done something wrong.
You done something wrong, like maybe not handling it properly from field to
Yeah.
From
kitchen.
field to table. And very often it's as simple as soaking your ducks in a saltwater brine to get the blood out. Then you start your recipe. Don't overcook it. I tell people, take your duck breast and cut it in half. Cook half of it medium well, half of it medium rare. Two very different pieces of meat.
But Scott, isn't it, as a chef, you're kind of at the mercy of how that game is handled? Because
Sure.
if it isn't handled, I mean, half of the final outcome is how they're handling it in the field.
And
And the butcher, if he leaves a silver skin on it. Like,
Sure.
how many times you run into that?
too many times.
Yeah.
And what I do is, if somebody brings me a piece of meat that I didn't harvest myself, first thing I do is I'll cut a little piece out, a little salt and pepper on it, throw it in a skillet, cook it rare to medium rare, and go, is it tough? Is it off tasting? Does this need a little marinade? If it tastes bad, I do not cover it up. I don't eat it. If there's any risk, if it tastes like it's spoiled or something else, don't soak it in buttermilk. Don't eat spoiled meat or fish that stinks. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
All
So I
right.
assume that people need to invest in more high mountain seasoning. And
High mountain
less,
seasoning.
less buttermilk, less cream of mushroom.
If you want a good smoker, Camp Chef,
Camp Chef makes the best.
which we'll have a message from Camp Chef, our very sponsor, right after this. So thank
right.
you so much, Scott,
Hey, you
for
bet.
visiting us today.
My pleasure.
Need a lightweight camp stove for your next adventure? The new Striker Series stove from Camp Chef is the perfect solution. Two models of this single-burner stove let you cook using propane or isobutane. The heat ring technology built into the stove's cookware lets you boil water in less than 2 minutes. And like everything else in the Camp Chef line, the Striker Series stove is built tough. If you hike, paddle, hunt, or fish and cook while you do it, you're going to love the Striker Series stove. Find it at your local sporting goods store or at campchef.com. Camp Chef, the way to cook outdoors.
Here we are, back at the lodge.
That's right.
Back at the Dorothy Day Center here in St. Paul, recording live. Well, whenever
Well,
Michelle edits it.
We're
decides
live when
it.
we're recording
Yeah.
it, but you're not listening live. Let's
Yeah.
put it that way.
Whenever Michelle edits it and gets it up on her iTunes
Yeah,
account.
it'll probably be close to deer hunting season when that
Oh,
happens.
come on. But we have another guest with us today. We have Jack Hennessy, blogger extraordinaire, wild game chef. What other kind of titles do you have, Mr. Hennessy?
I guess we could add journalist to that.
Journalist, very good. For the Pioneer Press, the local paper here in St. Paul.
Yeah.
And you were telling me you've been with the Pioneer Press since September.
Since September, yes.
Yeah. So how'd you get started with them? Journalist, blogger, chef extraordinaire.
I had received my master's in writing in Spokane and then immediately went into working as a line cook. My wife saw a posting for an outdoors copy editor with the Spokesman Review. So I started working with them, and they were open to the idea of me doing some writing, and I was able to combine my passion of cooking with writing and the outdoors. So I was really happy to be able to do that with the Spokesman Review. Then my wife and I, we decided we're going to make the move back to the Midwest. We're both originally from the Midwest.
Okay.
And I contacted Dave Orrick. He was very, very susceptible to the idea and very accommodating, and we met during the summer before we moved here. My wife and I moved here, and Dave said, well, let me run this by my editors. I like this idea. I think this would be a great compliment to our section. So it worked out, and since September, that's what we've been doing.
Now, the Pioneer Press recently updated their website, I believe.
Yes.
Is it outdoors section a little harder to find than it was before? I noticed Dave is kind of...
Is he buried?
He's
Yeah.
kind of promoting some links.
Yeah. My understanding is he's doing some experiments. They're talking about updating the website too. Dave is. He's wanting to make it more media friendly, I think, too. But running some experiments to see like how we can get readership or how Dave can get readership. Sometimes hiding links just so they can be found on Reddit forums and hunting forums, and just how to optimize online readership, more or less. So my understanding is a work in progress.
Experiment.
But experiments, yes.
Well, I think when you're doing something with the internet, it's an experiment in progress. Because about the time you figure something out, you got to figure something new out to stay, current.
It seems to be changing every day. Every day.
So predominantly your blog is on cooking then?
Yes.
Cooking? Okay.
I'm being allowed to branch out a little bit. I'm going to be covering a bow fishing story with Edge Bow Fishing here in the Twin Cities area. So going out with Kurt from Edge Bow Fishing next Saturday, then we're going to cover that story. And then we're going to try to come up with a recipe for carp.
Good luck.
Yeah. Well,
You should try that sous vide that maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Scott was telling us about sous vide for sportsmen. So, have you tried sous vide?
No.
No, I don't know. I might try it.
Yeah.
Well, so you're coming back to the Midwest, but so what excites you about being back here in the Midwest, or particularly in Minnesota? I mean, what didn't you have the experience out on the West Coast that you have here that really excites you?
Well, there's a lot of opportunities for the outdoors here, a lot of sightseeing, so many opportunities up north. My wife and I are still trying to go down our list and plan those trips, to the Upper Peninsula, to the Boundary Waters. We we tried to catch some walleye and mille lacs this past winter, spent the night on the lake. So I love the idea of ice fishing. I love the idea of the deer community here.
So your wife goes with you on?
She did for fishing.
Okay.
I'm trying to get her to take hunter education so she can go hunting as well. She's a little more timid when it comes to firearms and bows and this and that. But
it'd be good for her to do the hunter education.
Yeah.
I mean, I was.
Or the becoming an outdoors woman. You've
Yeah,
done several of those
I've done
things.
several becoming an outdoors woman. I mean, I was like 30 when I took hunter education, so I was like the only adult amongst,
You were 30 years old?
Yeah.
Well, that's a couple decades ago.
Oh, shut up. But yeah, Becoming an Outdoors Woman's a great program. And they have an annual camp, if you will, in Minnesota, and they have one in Wisconsin that's easily to drive to as well. And great group of ladies. You get to introduce yourself to all sorts of different activities.
Right.
Well, what's your specialty cooking? Do you like smoking, or do you just like to dabble in everything, or is there a certain...
I like to try different things. I left my smoker in Spokane.
You must have a big one.
No, it was my Weber grill is what I used.
Okay.
And I used charcoal, and I would put the coals over top. But yeah, we had to truncate our inventory to a certain extent, so some things were left with friends. But I enjoy trying different things and learning new recipes, and sometimes it does require doing a little bit more research. The 4 years as a line cook, we had a new special every week, so I learned how to make different things in that regard, and the menu would fluctuate, this and that, and I had a lot of great mentors there. But yeah, sometimes you just got to branch out, try different things. I'm excited about turkey season coming up. That was what I first got into, cooking-wise especially, too. A lot of different turkey recipes, because people will tell you wild turkey tastes like shoe leather. not if you do it correctly. And it can be great tasting, really healthy.
I suppose kind of as a follow-up to earlier when we had Scott on, how often do you use cream of mushroom soup?
You know what? I don't use cream of mushroom soup.
Is that a sign of a good chef or
and
something?
neither
now?
does Scott. So
Yeah.
apparently,
That's a Minnesota thing, though, you know?
Apparently,
Yeah.
we got to get people to.
This all started because Scott went out pheasant hunting in South Dakota. And that's kind of what you do when you go pheasant hunting or you go trap shooting, is that you bring a crock pot and you throw a bunch of stuff in it, and you go out and trap or you go out and pheasant hunt and you come back and it's already done. So that's where this all started.
Right. It was
His
kind of
beige cooking.
It was kind of a
does
joke
it.
question for you, but I think in reality, there are a lot of people that enjoy all the other aspects, and the cooking might not be as enjoyable, and they want to do something fast and easy, and there's probably nothing faster and easier than a crock pot and a can of soup and a few spices.
Yeah. I think Scott, he had a quote, I was reading his bio, where he says, I want to make meals where people can just go to the refrigerator, they don't have to go to the store, and they have this wild game, and they can make something simple. A cream of mushroom, it's great tasting, and it's all, it's non-perishable. It's always up there. And people love it with their Minnesota hot dish. That's a big thing.
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, what kind of secrets do you have for fish? I mean,
fish.
Trout season's coming up. Are you planning to do some experimenting there? Or?
I've had some good trout recipes. I like pan-seared trout. I think is always good. The sooner that you can clean the trout, the better. I feel like I've made that mistake of waiting on Eastern Washington's big trout land, either rivers or the lowland lakes, a lot of rainbow trout, and it gets hot in the summer in Spokane, and the bees get real bad. And I've waited one day because I was cleaning fish, and the bees were horrendous all over you. If you kept cleaning fish, you're going to get stung. But
oh my God.
The fish taste suffered as a result because I waited to clean these fish later. So as soon as you can clean your fish, put it on ice, that's what's going to make it taste the best.
I think that's a big part of cooking that people don't put enough emphasis on. I mean, I'm real big on the game preparation from right out in the field, because if you don't do things right out there, well, basically it's from field to fork.
Right.
And people think that something tastes gamey or it doesn't taste right. It's because what you did in the kitchen. Well, it may have been long before the kitchen, and you stand no hope of really ever recovering from it.
Right.
So there's a lot of aspects to bringing home food that everybody wants to eat, and also that it's wholesome.
Absolutely.
Right. Well, great.
Absolutely.
And we were talking before, one of your most popular blog posts was your venison Juicy Lucy.
The venison Juicy Lucy
So
got a little more
tell
exposure.
me about that. How'd that come about?
I had my first Juicy Lucy a little late. That wasn't the first thing we did when we went to Minnesota. I actually had it a month ago. A buddy from Chicago was visiting. His brother lives here in Minnesota, and he said, "Have you had the Juicy Lucy? If you haven't had it, you got to have it." So we went. We saw Minnehaha Falls that day. We tried to go to Matt's. There was a line out the door, so we ended up going to Groveland Tap. And everybody loves the Juicy Lucy here, so it made only sense to try to. Everybody loves deer hunting. It made only sense to combine
venison version. Yeah.
Michelle, how many Juicy Lucy's have you had?
I've never had one.
I've lived in Minnesota 53 years, and I've never had one either.
So I think we're going to have a road trip. And,
everybody thinks that Minnesota's known for Juicy Lucy.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I wouldn't like to try one. It's just that it's just not something that I've had this burning desire to go out and get.
And there's actually two places in Minnesota or Minneapolis that claim to have invented the Juicy Lucy.
It's Matt, and there's another place, and I'm telling you, I can't think of the other place off the top of my head.
I can't either.
Because I saw it on Travel Channel, Man vs. Food. He did a thing on it. So.
Yeah. One of them misspells it, and the other one doesn't. And they both wear T-shirts.
And there's a lot of copycat places, too, that try and make them, but they're not the originals.
Right.
But I think if we're going to do it for the first time, like you said, you tried to go to Matt's, but...
Yeah. It was.
I'm not sure if we need to start wrapping things up here, if they're going to start serving soon. What time are we doing?
It's 11:35.
All right.
Yeah.
They serve at noon?
11:45.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyhow, So you've got a few exciting things planned for the blog then, upcoming? You got
sometimes
you work on an editorial calendar, or how do you try and do that?
It's more on the fly, to be honest with you. It's what's maybe what the grocery stores have as far as supplementary ingredients. This past week was crappie tacos with a sweet and spicy mango salsa.
Nice.
That's because it's crappie spawning season, but all at the same time, mangoes seem to be.
So where do you get your ideas? I mean, you just keep your mind open and something comes to you, or?
Mind open, try to read other chefs, try to see what they're doing. Wild game.
Obviously, you're going to follow Scott now.
Yeah, absolutely, I did. On Twitter, absolutely. David Draper, he's also, Scott's friends with him. I also think he has some great recipes. Hank Shaw is great. But I feel like I have some great mentors still back in the Pacific Northwest with my old kitchen manager. I thought had a lot of great ideas, and so whenever I'm struggling for something, I might give him a phone call and say, what do you think of this?
So do you ever see a recipe that's out in the mainstream, like from the Pioneer Woman or something, and say, I bet that would work good with wild game with just a few tweaks? I mean, do you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you try to think of ways that these are some traditional dishes or maybe a little more experimental, and how can you combine wild game or wild fish and
Nice.
And a lot
How can readers contact you? I guess via the Pioneer Press.
Facebook's probably the easiest thing.
What's your Facebook page?
It's Braising the Wild, so it's all three words, as in braising, the cooking term, to play on words. Instead of braving the wild, it's braising the wild.
Okay,
makes sense.
My Twitter handle is at WildGameJack. It's all one word. And then I also have a web page, Braising the Wild, www.braisingthewild. And that's a work in progress too. That's right now I'm doing that with Blogger, trying to figure out, again, how to adapt to this ever-changing internet and online forum.
Yeah, it's tough. There seems like there's a new social media thing popping up all the time, and by the time you figure it out, everybody's on to the new one.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times if you talk to traditional writers or traditional cooks, that's really all they really want to do. They either want to cook or they want to write. All these stuff after that is just so much more work. And for other people, it may not be. But for these guys that are really passionate about one or two things, outdoors too, the media aspect,
I've got a question. It's a little bit away from blogging, but do you think that outdoor writers who write printed books is pretty much dead?
I certainly hope not. I don't think it's dead. I think there's always going to be people that are going to want to read a good story, and there's no better way to read a good story than in a book.
Are you thinking like ebooks, like transition to ebooks, or just?
I'll just relate a little story without getting the person in trouble here. I just purchased a book on some aspect of the outdoors that here in Minnesota, and I paid $24.95 for a book,
Right.
plus $6 shipping and handling. And so all of a sudden I had $30.95 into this little book.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I get the receipt in the mail, and the author is complaining to me because there was a glitch in the software online that didn't charge me Minnesota sales tax, so asked me to send another $2.13.
Oh my gosh.
So I already had $30.95 into this printed book, and now I've got an author who is asking for more. And on top of this, the $6 shipping and handling, it cost him $3.22 to mail it.
Right.
50 cents probably for the box that he mailed it out in.
Yeah.
And the rest would have covered the missing sales tax, but it wasn't good enough. He wanted more. And I started thinking about it, it's $31 I invested in a book.
Right.
There's good information in there, no doubt. But there's a lot of ways to get information out there.
That's true.
Off of blogs and that, and they're
ebooks,
even more,
like I was saying,
they're even more current than the books,
Right.
because they can be now.
That's true.
I sometimes wonder if that is becoming something of the past.
It could be. I had a college professor, this was back in 2005, that was telling us that books will be dead in 20 years. They won't exist. The printed versions that we're using now won't be a thing. So I think there's going to be a lot of people that are resistant to that idea. But I know what you're saying.
Well,
It's so much more
do you
efficient.
find that there's more and more people reading blogs than ever before?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean,
there's so many more
because
people writing them
obviously a
too.
transition, if you're
Yeah.
not reading books or magazines, and obviously magazine sales and everything is down,
Yeah.
they've got to be getting it somewhere. And
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, a lot more people. Everybody's getting their news through Facebook. No one opens up the news site necessarily. They're opening up their Facebook, then going to the news site from a link. That's how.
Well, we better wrap things up here today. It's been
Appreciate you
yeah.
going to volunteer and,
Yeah.
and help serve here at the Dorothy Day Center, and it was nice to meet you.
Yeah, it was great meeting you guys. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
That we'll
We'll let you know.
we'll
in a
be
month
taking
when
some
this
pictures
podcast is up.
and putting on the blog,
Okay.
and I'm sure you'll have something on your
Yeah.
blog about today too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So
It's great.
We'll let people know what's going on.
Cool.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You bet.
You've been listening to Back at the Lodge, a podcast hosted by Jim Broughton and Michelle Sherman. Please join them again next time for another episode as they discuss a variety of topics pertaining to the great outdoors.